Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a great time to be in Joburg, this beautiful city of ours, this beautiful, ugly city. We wanted to use the opportunity of Collations 2, which has been running the last 2 days and finishes off this evening, curated by our Neo Mayanga, to also launch and celebrate the collaboration between Marigold beads, Joni Brenner, visual artist, and the center. And we thought we would just take a couple of minutes to talk about why this collaboration makes sense for us. You know, on the one hand, the center has started in the last few years to move around the world. And as we do that, and we share our work, we also share our philosophies and our ethics and our ways of collaborating and working collectively, our deep listening and our trusting of the process and our impulses. And that is really what resonates. The work is always celebrated. It's interesting to people, but it's actually our philosophies, and we get those from here. That's where we know we are fed from this context. And so, as a visual artist, who incidentally was lecturing at Wits when I was doing my degree, I've witnessed, doesn't look like it. I've always admired Joni's practice for its dedication and depth to a kind of, in some ways, a singularity, but knowing and trusting that there's, in the moment and in the action, something that the material gives back to you and tells you about itself. And so I'd love to start first just by having you tell us a bit about your practice as a visual artist. You have a show on at the moment at the Origin Center, and what the last few decades have been as a perpetual making and investigation into a topic that has interested you.
Yeah. Is that all? Yeah. Okay. So thank you for talking to me and having me here. And I'm glad that you asked me about my own practice, because it's really something that is shared with the beaders that I work with in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, and it's also something, I think, which is what we've been exploring, something that is shared with quite a lot of the practices and processes that you work with here in the center. So I think everybody here really understands deeply that collaborations have to have some kind of shared approach or philosophy or way of working to meet or to find meeting points and grow in that way. But I've often thought about how is it that I've managed to have this really joyful and exciting collaboration with a group of bead workers who are based in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, who have been beading on making beadwork on the loom for a lot longer than I've collaborated with them. So I've worked with them since 2011, which is about 13 years or so, but they started their cooperative in the early 1990s. So it's a long-distance collaboration, although we speak a lot and I travel as much as I can, which is only really about 2 or 3 times in the year. But I often think that this is actually a hard thing to get right. This is difficult actually to find connection and points of contact with all of this distance and space between us. But there's something, and I think about it over and over again, just that over and over again is probably very key, but there's something that I think about. My own practice is so linked to their practice, and it's that we can kind of hook into with each other along the way. So my own practice has really been, I think, I like to distinguish the difference between repetition and replication, because a lot of the work that I do has been, I've worked with portraits for like more than 30 years, and along the way I also started working with looking at a skull, because I wanted to understand the internal architecture of the head a little bit more. And once I started working with the skull, I was doing these daily practice paintings. And actually, Bronwyn, probably at the time you were a student, I was working at Wits a lot. I'm now there in a much smaller capacity, but at the time, I really felt like I needed to stop resenting going to work every day and to find at least a small space for my own practice. And it really helped me to be doing these small paintings of skulls every morning before I went to work, and then finishing them when I came back from work. And I felt like this ongoing practice, which was very undemanding in a way. It wasn't like trying to put a big exhibition together or find anything brand new or exciting. It was just actually looking at that skull every morning. And I was different, it was different, the light was different, the paints were different, but they're very, very tight parameters, but it gave me a space for just working in this constant, ongoing way. And then before I knew it, there were hundreds of paintings and there were many exhibitions that were just emerging out of this dedicated practice. And what I could notice in it was that it's not that I was just doing the same thing over and over again every morning, but the repetition is different from replication or reduplication or making the exact same thing, which is also not what's going on in these beads, even though it's just one form and that form has been repeated for all these 13 years on a daily basis in an ongoing way, but each time it's different, and it's in looking for those small differences. And it's something that we were talking about a lot, where things start to open up.
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that immediately occurs to me is that I know as an artist in your studio or in a space, as a visual artist, it can be quite lonely and quite daunting. And also that kind of wanting to be profound immediately and competitive is a crippling effect. And in the performance space, it's no different. And so one of the approaches that the Centre uses whenever we're beginning a new project, but that we carry through a lot of our incubation time and workshopping together, is starting the day with a warm-up. That is noticing each other, noticing your body, how it feels, where your mind's sitting, where there's tension, acknowledging the room, acknowledging the shift from being outside, where you're having to be this kind of singular entity moving through the city, aware of everything, into a space where you're now creating, and that this different condition has to be acknowledged. And those warm-ups are so generative of actual work and ideas, but what the most significant thing that they do is they connect us to each other and to ourselves. So we enter a kind of different body space. We push from this busy, demanding, sort of severed head space into the body. And the body has just got so much to say that constantly surprises us. And so that repetition is also, I have seen over the 9 years at the Centre, when we forget to warm up, how quickly things fall apart. And actually how quickly a kind of toxicity can even enter a space. So warming up with your material and with yourself makes so much sense. I think the other thing that I love about these beads is that they really are, each strand is its own individual, and yet they're related. And across your special projects and across what you're constantly making, they're instantly recognizable. There's in them, in the process of making them, a kind of palpable memory of hands that have spent time, that have dedicated 24 hours of their lives, of their thinking, of their musing, whilst making this on a limited framework. And so a lot of the time when you speak to people about the Centre for the Less Good Idea, there's a sort of, for people who don't know, they think, well, why would you be interested in bad ideas? It's never about a bad idea, it's about the idea that comes after the good idea that catapulted you into a state of making or collaborating and generating. But it's about acknowledging that once you're making, there are things that happen if you're open to them, the improvisation and the spontaneity that you couldn't have formulated in the mind's eye. It's being told to you, and if you're receptive and you follow it, you're going to discover things that are profound in the end. And I think each strand of bead holds this as a kind of a distilled metaphor.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that you're saying about materiality and about practice, but the thing that struck me just there where I picked up the mic I wanted to butt in was this thing about, for me, the good idea also carries with it something about the completed idea, where you've got this, you're already at the end point with a good idea. It's like you know what you want to do, you know what it wants to, what it should look like and where you're going, and the path is kind of clear. And that's actually the dangerous path, I think, because, and when I think about this experience and the long relationship I've had with the beaders, it was all completely accidental. In some ways, it belongs so completely in this ethos here, where there was never a plan to set up a group that would make necklaces. There was never a plan for any. There was never any idea really that this would become what it has become, and it really. It's a little bit like you do something, you think it's interesting, you do something else but make a tiny change, and then you think, well, what about another color or a tone of a color, and then before you know it, with all those little steps, you are somewhere else that you couldn't have imagined. And I know that's so much part of what is in the air here. But it is so part of this journey, which has really been a constant process of noticing and following. What have we done, and what could we do next? In fact, this entire project started, it's hard to believe when you look at all of these different designs, and there's so much variation, even within this one range, that when we started, it was just a very plain, solid color necklace. And we did that for a long time, for like 6 or 7 months, and this is like lots and lots of necklaces all being made just in one color. And I noticed when people came to me that they would say, oh, look how nice this red one looks with the pink one, and they'd buy both. And it happened a few times until I started thinking, wouldn't it be nice if the red and the pink were in one necklace? And then I suggested it to the beaders. I said, what about trying two colors? We called them half-half. And then we did that for a bit. And then one day the beaders, they phoned and said, what about quarters? And I thought, I can see this has now got inbuilt continuity, and I could recognize it early on, because once we'd done quarters, it was like, well, are we doing quarters in 2 colors? And I said, yeah, like black, white. And then they said, well, what about black, white, pink, white? And then it was quarters in 2 colors, quarters in 3 colors, quarters in 4 colors. And then it was, well, what about a line between each of the quarters? And then another beader would say, what about 2 lines? And someone would say, what about a bigger gap or a color in between? And then you can just see how crazy the potential was, and it did unfold like a runaway train. And in a way, you just feel like it's this unbridled creativity that is just there through noticing and following.
Yeah, but it's 13 years, and it's an incredible range now of infinite possibilities, really, in this combination of what you bring in. But ultimately, it's still a very similar, tight framework on a loom with a weft and a warp, or however that works, and one size bead. You know, I think if you were sitting down and thinking, I'm going to become a designer of sort of boutique jewelry, you would go for everything that's available. How many size beads can I have? How many kinds of threading is there? The fact that it's limited to this is actually its generative quality.
And it's something that going just back to my skull work, it's something that I could understand through my own practice. So I knew that I always had a brush, watercolor, and a smallish piece of paper, and that was it. So it's very sort of tight parameters. And then I could see that what was happening was this, like one skull as well. So just one example. It's not working off many different skulls. It was one that was borrowed from the anatomy department at Wits, which I've really come to know very well from looking and looking and looking again and again. And in a way, it's like I think that my own understanding of how this works and the beaders come with their very deep in the body, in the hands understanding of how this works, means that it's a shared language. Even though I'm working with different materials and I'm not a beader myself, and I can tell you this is very hard to do. But the beaders who do it are absolute expert master beaders who can make these without looking at the loom. And when you walk into the studio, it's noisy. There's lots of talking. There's lots of laughing. There's radios on. There's like a whole lot of stuff going on. And all the while, there's this very patient, very repetitive, very repeated, very meditative, slow growing of a necklace line by line. And there's something also of that, of that continuity and the slowness and the meditative practice that's so understood in the hands that allows for a lot of play to happen, because no one is worried about the technical skill, because it's all absolutely, it's in the bag that. And then all of the playfulness and the capacity to try unusual colors or a slight shift here and there is where the focus is. And that's, I think, makes it a very exciting experience for the beaders. It's not just mechanical. It's not mechanical at all. And then at the same time, it is also something that allows for the growth. Yeah.
Yeah, so for us, this is the beginning of this journey, and I think, but one of the things that it does when we're here with people, but also when we move abroad, is that there's often a request of, do you have something that I can take with me? And this is such a beautiful way to talk about the center and its philosophy, because it does kind of pulse with that. And, I think I've worn your beads for a long time, and everywhere I go in the world, people say to me, where's this from? And I also love the fact that it's really only from here. It's from here. If you want them, you've got to go to Joburg, or now you've got to see something of the centers. I think that's really significant.
I think it is, and maybe if I can just sort of say one other thing is that the beads are full of people, and I think that's what you're speaking about when you speak about the materiality and the kind of tactility and the mobility, but it's also specific to a place and to an ethos. And I think there's so few things that any of us wear now where we know who made them. And it does connect you very directly to a specific group of beaders who have built this practice, who work together, who develop ranges, who follow all of where their beads have gone in the world, and pay attention to all of that. But it bonds wearers, and I think I have heard so many stories from you and other people of people who have worn these necklaces in weird and remote parts of the world and been identified as like, oh, you must know so-and-so or this place, or you must come from there, or what's the connection. So they're also very binding,
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Joni.
It's such a pleasure.
It's been such
so
fun doing
wonderful
this
to
with
see
you.
them here.
Demakatso was one of the driving forces around this, our holder of all things here at the centre. And Ntabi Singh made this beautiful table for us together with Lindani, and we're excited. This feels like a new step for the centre. And yeah, I know we can't wait to go and literally spread the word.
And we're also going to watch where this design goes,
Yeah.
because this is just the beginning, so
Yeah.
we'll see. Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bronwyn.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to hear about this. I was curious about, you joined them in 2011, and what were the group of women working on before that? Is that when they started making these exact necklaces? And then are these also sold in Zimbabwe at all, or in anywhere else? I know you said it connected directly to the center in Joburg, so very curious about that.
Oh, okay, sure. So the beaders started their cooperative in the early 1990s, and it was a time in Bulawayo where things were quite robust and thriving, and they had lots of local clients and beaded for Zimbabwean rock stars and garments for Miss Bulawayo, and they did a lot. I mean, they're very well known at the time, and they built their cooperative, and they also made much more traditional objects for local markets. So they made things like armbands and headbands and things like that. And then they worked, I think there were some other initiatives that they were involved in that were making other objects. I think there were some beaded handbags and things like that. When I met them in 2011, it was actually a very low point in Zimbabwe, and the cooperative had actually shrunk, and lots of beaders had moved on. They were quite badly hit by the HIV epidemic, and so it was actually a very difficult time when I met them. And as Zimbabwe has actually remained quite a difficult place, and there isn't a broad buying market, and it's very hard to get resources that are needed for this kind of production. So it's a complicated collaboration where you really do come face to face with realities and difficulties. But so I don't think that there's a huge market in Zimbabwe, and one of my main contributions has been to find a broader market for the work, and I did introduce this very simple, I hesitate even to call it a design, this very simple necklace with no clasps or no fuss. And I think that has been something that has taken it further or into a different space where many more people feel comfortable and they're easy to wear, and it's a different kind of thing, and it's all that we've done for all of these years, and the cooperative has now grown back into 16 women who have been beading these necklaces for all these years, and I think it is really a creative and economic livelihood for the group. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Bongiwe, also known as Mtwakazi. Wow, I love beads. So that's the first thing that kind of grabbed my attention when I came here. So I also come from a culture of huge or a lot of people that like to bead. It's in the Eastern Cape. And we use a lot of like patterns. And I'm also a jewelry designer myself. I use the calabash, which I plant for 6 months, and with the offcuts, I make earrings. And part of what moved me about what you were saying is the meditative, process of beading, which I realized that for me personally, it puts me in a calm space. And I've learned a lot of like mathematics through the beading. Like when I go buy beads, I learned that with the sizes that the more the number, the smaller the size. And I was like, no ways, it can't be like that. But one of the things that inspire me is that with what you said, the meditative space, and which takes me to my question that, are there any plans with a group of women that this can be created as an intergenerational space where children can come and learn from the women? Because I feel like within the spaces of villages, that culture is really kind of fading away. And it would be lovely to see, like, for instance, children coming to visit from an early childhood development center and really growing up with this skill. And do you have those plans for the future?
So
Thank you.
I love that question. I really love that question. And it's so interesting for me because I think because I work as an artist, I kept on, speaking to the beaders about the creative space and, all things around the development of designs and whatever. And one day the one beader said to me, look, Joni, we are really interested in this, obviously, but for us, there are two things that are important. The one, this is bread on the table. The other is that this is ensuring continuity of the practice. And I thought that was so interesting. I like when, just thought they said we need to ensure that the next generation knows about this technique and our work and acquires the skills to continue. And it's an interesting demographic in the group because there is a group of older women who can I always think you really are a master when you can fix mistakes. So they really, they do a lot of training and overseeing, and they do the very complicated part of making this design, which is the fastening and the joining. And they train, and then there's another layer or level of beaders who are young, really young women straight out of school who bring a completely different energy into the group, and they're like highly fashion conscious and really interested in just sort of the contemporary urban world, and it's a great mix, and I think that is a part of a slow long-term vision for continuity, and it's such an important thing. You're absolutely right. Otherwise, these things just disappear. Yeah.
I just also wanted to respond to Bongiwe, because what you've just said took me straight back, and I hadn't made the link in 2011 to a project that I worked on, which was a creation of an educational book and film called Africa Meets Africa. And in this case, we were in Mpumalanga and working with Ndembele communities. And one of the reasons this project started was that the sort of head of education in that space had made a public announcement at some point to say he was responding to the incredible difficulty in passing mathematics for high school children, but that girl children were kind of at a 90% failure rate. And so the person who ran this organization that created educational books and films, which were about reintroducing topics that we study at school through one's own lived experience, rather than having this kind of enforced, imported idea of how something functions. And so in this case, she began to work with the elderly and experienced beaders, and they extrapolated all of the geometric theorems that one learns, for example, in high school, from a way of introducing maths not through an abstract Greek theorem, but through the making. So we made little beaded patterns that would show you refraction, repetition, all of that. And the first exercise in the classroom with the teachers was to make the beads. And after that, you slowly started to pull in the maths. Once that happened, in the example schools that we worked with, the pass rate of the girls exceeded the boys. And it was an extraordinary experiment over a 2-year period that illustrated this was not a matter of girl children not being able to understand maths. This was the way in which it was shown or demonstrated that was completely inaccessible to their lived experience. But the principles are all there. Sadly, when we tried to put this book into the schooling system, it was rejected by the education department. But it will live with me forever how myself as a child felt that maths was something that I would never grasp. Because I was constantly struggling with it. And sitting in those sessions and learning to do that beadwork myself, that combination of a calming meditation and then slowly reckoning with the number and the patterns that appear naturally in front of you, it just opens up and your brain is able to access something that it wasn't before. So it's such a great kind of reflection. Thank you. Okay. Oh, we're welcome to please have a glass of wine or a drink with us afterwards. It's that's on the center. Thank you.